Good morning, cooks. So it's Halloween this weekend, and so it is going to be Apple Week, okay? So I thought what we would do today is have 3 different kind of levels of apple pie. So anybody who's ever tasted Tarte Tatin would probably love to be able to make it, and it is a little bit tricky, but I would challenge you to give it a whirl because it is just the most delicious apple pie in the whole world. And it is a little bit technical, but it's well worth challenging. And what's the worst thing that can happen? It ends up on the floor, the dog eats it. At least you've learned something. So that's the top level one. The middle level one is your classic French open apple tart, which is made with very pretty, very tiny little slices of apple on top of a kind of a custardy base. And then the entry level apple pie, let's call it a standard apple pie, but with flaky pastry. Thank you, Catherine Giblin, for the recipe. I would challenge you to try and make your own flaky pastry. I have a batch in the fridge at the moment. It's the first time I've ever made it. It's not difficult. You freeze the butter and you grate it so you're not handling it. And let's hope it'll work. If you're making either of the 2 trickier pies, I would strongly recommend actually just buying your pastry, because otherwise you're going to be caught for time. And there are recipes below for the 3 different tarts. And so there we go. So if you decide you want to make the Tarte Tatin, the most important thing, there's lots of important things actually, but is your what you make it in. So I have here a selection of, this is a kind of ceramic thing with relatively straight sides. It's about 8 or 9 inches, oven proof. Or you could use, if you have a saucepan, even if it was higher edges than that, but that kind of size, about 8 or 9 inches. You could use a cake tin, except I can't use this one because it's got everything would drip out the middle. Or you could use something like that, but that is a bit bigger. You'd have to have more apples, but you can still use it. So I think what I'm going to use is this one today. So I'm going to stop the video now. I'm going to get it to a certain point, and then I'm going to show you the trickier bits, and you can decide which one you decide to make at the weekend. Okay, so I have all my apples peeled. Now these are windfalls from my garden. So there are some that are a bit manky. I'm just going to cut those in half and discard. You want to cut them in half. Actually, I'm just getting rid of those nasty bits. Before you cut them in half, you're going to take off the top and the bottom, which feels slightly wasteful, but you will be glad that your apple has a flat bottom later on. So if you get your apple like that, cut it in half. And then the tricky bit, actually it's not tricky at all, is to get rid of the core. So I have always been a devil for collecting kitchen gadgets. This is an apple corer, you could use that. That is a melon baller, you could use that. That is a knife, you could also use that. So let's assume you don't, well, if you have one of these, you're just going like that, okay? If you have one of these, you are going, hang on a second now. You can just scoop out the core with the bally bit. And if you have a knife, it isn't actually rocket science either, you just go like that. So what you want is a half with a flat bottom with no core, okay? So so I have my apples all prepped. They're all flat bottoms and in halves with the core taken out. Now what I've done is I've kind of offered them into the pan just so that they all fit tightly. There are 17 halves there, so you're talking 8 or 9 apples for me. I would err on a smaller apple rather than a bigger apple and try and keep them relatively the same size, otherwise they will cook unevenly. So that is where you're at. You're not going to be leaving them in there, but I'm just showing you how they fit. So you'll be kind of doing them like this. That's how you'll be lining them up. When you do get to the stage where you're putting them in, you're going to be acting quite fast because there's going to be a hot, bubbly caramel in here and you don't want it to burn, so you don't want it to be taking forever. So that. Okay, so I've melted 1/3 of the butter in a frying pan. Now this is the butter for the caramel recipe. I would suggest you ignore the pastry recipe and buy the pastry. That would be my advice, but anyway, whatever you want to do. So you've melted half your butter. No, 1/3 of your butter, about, and you are good. Wash my hands, kind of. You see, you should always be prepared. Do I have any of my implements out? No, but anyway, there we go. That's me. Okay, so you're just going to toss them in the butter. I've made Tarte Tatin loads of times, but actually this is the first time I've made this recipe. But it looks like it might be kind of an easy one to follow. And I'm hoping that it will be a good one. So you're going to leave that there on a lowish heat. Put a lid on it. And leave it for about whatever the recipe says. You could print out your recipe. 15 minutes? 5 minutes? I don't know. We'll see.